All right, Dan, let's get into the deep conversation. So, Dan, the reason why I'm so interested in your work is, there's three reasons. People always talk about the construction of, like last week, I talked about the new domesticity and
Hmm.
how domestic culture was shaped. Hey, Dwayne, do you mind putting, I still see, does everybody see Dan? No? Yes? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Great. I see Dwayne still, but that's inspirational. So I guess it's probably just my Zoom. So there's three reasons. Number one, the construct of masculinity. If the female or the woman was constructed in the 18th century in terms of the domestic goddess, so to speak, the woman who ran the house, and the man was the one who went to work. And obviously, there's a history of this. I'm not a gender expert, but you know, even in prehistoric times, so to speak. And the man has been constructed. In fact, last week I showed a book that I learned from Brown. Anybody who went to Brown or created the Brown book of business, Manhood in America. And I read it in college about the cultural construct of men being like this, you know, gritty Marlboro man type of person, and I'm clearly not that. And I was interested in the same way that like women were shaped in a patriarchal society, men were shaped. So that's number one. And how is that shaping causing a men's crisis in the world? Number two, mental health, right? And it's because men traditionally aren't in touch with their emotions, right? 70% of suicide rates are are male related. 70% of the suicides are conducted by men, I think is the stat. And then the third thing is that, I heard we're in the midst of the Me Too movement. In fact, I heard from people, it's not called a movement, it's hashtag Me Too, and that's a tool that's getting women to speak up. And I think I heard Esther Perel say this, that the Me Too, hashtag Me Too cannot be successful if men don't change and understand why they are the ones that are, causing uh, this atrocious culture of sexual harassment and abuse. So that's kind of like the zeitgeist that you're dovetailing Everyman with, would you say?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the cultural moment, and it's not how we frame our work. We frame our work directly to men in order to ideally meet them where they are, to bring them in, to do some of this deeper emotional and substrate touching work. But yes, exactly. What you're naming, I believe right now, like the cultural conditions for an organization like Everyman to exist and thrive right now are kind of ideally set, with our leadership of the country being like like a wild example of a throwback to some very non-functional masculinity, to the Me Too movement, to everything that's going on. I feel like the moment is now here where a generative and new conversation can be had in this space.
Okay, and so who are the type of men or some of the men that might be considered toxic men? So I would love you to define what toxic masculinity is. And are those some of the men that kind of come to your program?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think about toxic masculinity. I try to get more specific about it. So let's talk about behaviors. Let's talk about behaviors that on the extreme end, like you said, 70+% of suicides are committed by men. 95+% of homicides around the world are committed by men. The majority of emotional sexual abuse, both domestic abuse, child abuse, sexual abuse, these things, again, are greatly done and enacted by men. And those are the dramatic, large scale, big, heavy, impactful ones. And that doesn't even touch the day-to-day depression, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, and just general unease and unhappiness in marriages and families and schools, in workplaces. And I think this all comes down to, if I had to label or name toxic masculinity with a different name, it would just be a fragile old master stereotype of ways of being in the world that no longer maybe never worked, but absolutely now the light's being shown on it in a way it just absolutely, it's not working. It's not working for men. It's not working for people of all genders. It's not working for all people of all races. It's just not working. It's flatly the wrong approach to the modern world, to today's contemporary world. And so are these the men that come to our community and our retreats? Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think it touches all of us. I think this is a, I have spent my like last 15 years of my life very expressly and purposely attempting to heal and grow and expand my mind and my heart and be inclusive and loving. And do I still carry elements of, patriarchal things, domination culture, unhealthy things? Absolutely. I'm still unlearning all of the time. And so I feel like, our community, what it draws is men who are willing to change or willing to do things different, willing to open up and take a new perspective. And most of all, willing to do the uncomfortable work of digging down inside and finding out who they are, their real deep human parts. And so that's true. And, in order to meet men where they at, why they come to us is because they're lonely and they're hurting. They're lonely and they're hurting, and life isn't working for them. Their marriages might not be working. They're, professionally not where they want to be. So it's definitely it's a personal growth opportunity. But from my viewpoint as a founder, and what I really pay attention to is this as a potential mechanism for real systemic change in our society.
Mm-hmm. So the opposite of the man you try to help get men to be in touch with, right? I guess in touch with their emotions, being vulnerable. The opposite, or that is the one that's really being part of a culture that they thought would accept, sexual harassment. Like we've seen images, we watch Mad Men, we know about these old white men who have been conducting sexual harassment where they thought it was like normal in a sense. And so, is this, what would you say is the psychological drive for that? Or is it a cultural construction?
What's the psychological drive for that old way, the more dominated, that unhealthy way?
Still existing, right? But
yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a very long old question, but in my personal viewpoint on it is that it evolved from ancient power dynamics. It's just simple power dynamic, and I think that for a long time, psychologically, maybe physiologically, men were rewarded for playing the power, for dominating. They just simply were. I mean, and I think there's an immense unwinding that can occur, and I'm hopeful because around me, the community of men who are stepping in to this new paradigm, it's actually quite fast. It's quite widespread. I mean, when you have a man come into a group or a community and even just do a couple hours of some self-reflection, and there's an important part I want to mention here, and that's, so there's this master stereotype, there's all this history, there's this way of being, it's just so big and so immense, and it's proliferated so deeply in our culture and individually. There are not yet enough examples and models and modeling of what a truly healthy, connected, symbiotic man is, right? And there's not yet enough examples of where men are clear that they will be and this is unfortunately like behavior change psychology. Like, what is the reward for a man to get in touch with his feelings and to be more empathetic, to be more understanding? So in the personal life, that reward is real. It's that my wife's going to divorce me. I need to do this, right? But through that process, that's just one example, right? It could be many different things, but through the process of it's also heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. I think I like sit behind this curtain that not many people go behind, and that is the deepest truth of thousands of men. And that is kind of my capacity and gift, is to be able to help guide men to the deepest parts of themselves and express that. And it's heartbreaking because on the surface and what the behavior is destructive and harmful and downright mean or whatever it is. But underneath that is, men, they want to love and they want to be loved and they want to do good and they want to do good for other people. And men, I guess, like
all men? You think all men do?
I can't answer that because I haven't sat with all men, but 99.99% of the men I have ever, like, obviously there's a self-selecting mechanism there that men are coming who are willing to go there. But I also come from a spiritual background and a practice background of basic human goodness. I do believe that.
So it seems like you're teaching like healthy masculinity in a way, right? I mean,
all the way. You know what? Honestly, we're teaching healthy human connection, healthy emotional connection, which goes beyond gender. It's like what we're doing is not only applicable to men, not even close. This is just a simple part of the human wiring that men are not engaging. They've not been shown how to engage it, and they're not healthy when they don't engage it.
But you come into like a lot of corporations when, pre-COVID, when Me Too was, and it's, I mean, there is a zeitgeist right now of domestic abuse, but like when hashtag Me Too was so dominant, like for the last couple years or so, you've been asked from corporations because many of the HR departments wanted to focus on this systemic toxic masculinity. So they're asking you to come in to help with that, right? To help people learn that.
Well, they are, and there's an interesting note there where a lot of the same negative behaviors and systems in masculinity are reflected fairly similarly in the leadership culture. Leadership which isn't a necessarily gendered construct, but a lot of the work that I do, whether it's with a farmer from Montana who's coming to me to open up his heart, or whether it's a CEO of a large corporation. The similar mechanisms of being able to actually feel and actually be connected to other people it's the same mechanism, and it's the same process of getting to it. So we don't specifically do corporate work well, I'll just be honest, a lot of corporations haven't been willing or ready to bring somebody in to work with their men. It's like a particularly, there's a tripwire there of like, oh man, we have these problems in our organization, but we're going to spend money on the guys, on the men. Like that doesn't, like, it hasn't quite aligned there, but it does bring up what you started with, like Esther Perel's quote, like Me Too is not ultimately going to succeed unless men grow and evolve in order to meet it. And, right. So I think we're making our way there. I honestly feel, and obviously I have a situational bias here, but I feel like working with men on as broad and general level as possible, it's just this, it's like an unmined resource. Like, I think actually men want this. Men do. Right. They want to be better people. They want to be loving. They don't want to be the problem. They want to be part of and I just think it's going to take a series of steps. It's going to take some time for our institutions and things to welcome that and put resources behind it.
Okay. How is your work? Well, first of all, what is the type of work that you do? And then second of all, how has it changed in this, I guess, where it's hard to be as connected digitally as it is in real life, because you do these boot camps or
so historically what we did weekend experiential retreats, and we did wilderness expeditions, which were ways to entice men to come do some deep personal work. And then we also had a training where we train facilitators, we train coaches, we train therapists in our methodology. And our methodology is as simple as learning to really slow our systems down, learn about our how we're wired, and then feel, like literally kind of do emotional yoga where we get used to feeling sad. We can be comfortable and relaxed when we're ashamed. And we just sort of learn to feel, actually, and then express ourselves directly, which creates this deeper human connection. And so we did it experientially. And at the core of what we've always done is there are peer-to-peer men's groups that are all over the country. They've never been organized. They've always been sort of this decentralized thing. And they bring an immense value. They're a way for men to, like, it's like an emotional gym or emotional CrossFit session. You go to each week and you build these relationships, you learn who you are. It's just absolutely wildly beneficial. So that's what we did. What we've done now since COVID, and this was,
by the way, we always do culture class after hours, and everybody, if you could, if you have time to stay on, it seems like we should continue the conversation if you're willing.
yeah,
Sure.
I could take a few. I might have to text my next one, but sure.
Right.
But I'll wrap this up quick. So because of COVID, what we've done is pivoted to an online membership platform that we run through Mighty Networks, which delivers the same tone and the same structure of our in-person events in a digital format. And we've proven some pretty wildly helpful things, is that human connection and this emotional resonance that we're able to get in person happens not only does it happen digitally and virtually, but it actually gets rid of a lot of the barriers to it. And I feel that we're on the verge of an actual scalable, sustainable organization and a way to spread this much quicker and much further. So.
Okay. And how did you and why did you start this? I mean, I guess you saw a need for men to connect with themselves.
So I was born a pretty tender, sensitive little guy, and I grew up in a family that had zero capacity for feeling. I grew up on the plains of North Dakota, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to be vulnerable and share. And my father's okay with me sharing this, but my father was a closeted alcoholic. And nobody knew, and he was suicidal my entire life. But all he ever said is he was fine. He was fine. That it was that level of not sharing the truth. That's what I grew up in. When I finished college, I became a wilderness therapy guide. So for about 5 years, I led groups of young men on therapeutic wilderness trips to find themselves and to do inner work. And I just quickly keyed onto a cultural epidemic of these young men not even close to having the humanity that they needed to grow, mature, and become healthy men. And it particularly got unique and pointed when their fathers would come out. And I started working with fathers and sons, and I watched these dads who had the greatest intentions in the world, but absolutely no ability, no understanding, and no capacity to do the loving fathering that was needed for these boys. And so that just that became my obsession all of my 20s. And I just started really leaning in that direction. And really quick, one more thing on why. So I found my first men's group in New York City, up on, I think it was 27th and 8th in this crappy loft apartment. And like the one night in a men's group, I came out of it knowing that, wow, why is this so impactful and helpful? And two, the second question is, why is it so weird and hard to talk about, right? So guys getting together to emote and to feel and to connect and to do this human thing, I knew there was something there. And so the short answer, I needed it. My family really needed it. And every man I've ever come into contact can benefit from a level of deepening their emotional capacity.
Huh. Wow. And so how did you start it? And how did you get people to join? What was let's go back to Dwayne. Like, what was the why and the how you started?
Yeah. So I was about to have my first son. And I did have my first son 4 years ago. And I was, at the time, I was the executive producer and the director and cinematographer of an adventure hunting and food show. So I'd fly around the world and have these massive adventures and make programs about them, right? I lost my job, which is a different talk. Okay. And a new son on the way. But literally for about 6 years before, I knew I had to do this thing. Like it tapped me on the shoulder every day. It was like, you had to do it. But I was terrified. I was terrified to be the guy to step up and say, men, guess what? You got feelings. You're not healthy if you don't feel them. So I was just too scared. I got fired and my son was born. And my friend pushed me to do our first retreat. We had 18 guys show up to the Berkshires in a barn for a weekend. And the impact was, try not to be too hyperbolic when I talk about it, but it was the most wild response of goodness. You know, we got an initial seed round basically closed from that first retreat, and like men just came in to volunteer and volunteer and volunteer. And we have had a really rocky business history so far, but our impact is something I'm really proud of. And we've,
Well, that's so, like, give me an example of somebody who came in and transformed through the work that you do.
here's my favorite one to talk about because it's just close to home. It's a man from rural Iowa who listens to Joe Rogan. He works at a bank and has tattoos all over his body, and he's just a total bro. He came to us because he was so broken and scared and just didn't know where to go. He heard me on Joe Rogan, and he could muster up the strength to call. And he lost his wife. So he's a single father. He lost his wife to breast cancer when his son was 9 months old or 10 months old, and has been literally doing life alone with the stress and the impact of being a father for 13 years. And when he first came and worked with us, like, he'd just sit and cry. He'd just sit and cry for hours. He had years and years and years of tears built up. And to pop to the sort of the after is he's just, once he got through like all of the grieving that he had never done and all of the owning of how hard life was, and once he had men at his side, and once he learned how to have support around him, he just flowered into this. He's just a completely different man. The way he sends pictures of his son, and they go on these crazy vacations together, and he's changed his jobs. He started a podcast. He sent me this video recording of him and his father, who he'd never had a deep talk with his father's whole life. He sent me this recording of them like hugging and thanking, like it's like the transformation of accepting. It's almost like his life went from black and white to technicolor. Like the feeling wasn't there. The permission to feel wasn't there. The permission to love. And that's like what's underneath all this. And this might get a little woo-woo or touchy-feely, but I don't really care. Men's love is locked up. Men's capacity to receive and give love is underneath that emotional barrier. And I actually think that our world needs that. In what we're going through, we need the empathy. We need the love. We need the care. We need that. These are these resources that are not accessible to us right now. We need it. We all need it.
Okay, well, I would love to open up to questions, but before I do that, so men, okay, who have committed sexual harassment or have been thought of in terms of, so many toxic leaders have been, pushed out, and, it's been revealed, and it's happened during COVID, it's happened pre-COVID. And is there any way for these men who are sexual harassers to be redeemed in any way?
Yeah.
But could culture ever forgive them once they figure out, the reason of the construct that may have produced them to do this?
It's a good question. I think the answer is I have two answers, and I think they fit together in a paradoxical way. First of all, the accountability and the responsibility to keep people safe and protect people is of utmost importance, and I don't think anything should change there. However, what is clear from neurological research, somatic psychotherapy, a lot of things, hurt people, right? People who are hurt are the perpetrators the majority of the time. It's not 100% of the time, but the majority of the time, those who hurt others are fundamentally hurt themselves. And it is this, the way that we're learning about how trauma generates or progenerates through our bodies, through our lives, and how we pass it on to our kids. We're learning more and more about this right now. And the answer, it's hard. With that specific example, it's really hard. Somebody who's abused somebody sexually, I think it's a massive lift to ask anyone to have warm, forgiving feelings. But I'll tell you this, when I worked with young men in the woods, the bullies, the ones who hurt people more, right? Like the aggressive ones, the violent ones, when you gave them the time and the space and the honest place to open up, they had the most horrendous, deeply horrifying stories of their childhoods and their lives. And the outpouring of compassion, regardless of what they've done to people, when the space is created for them to, I guess what I'd like to say is healing is actually possible. And
Right.
we don't have the systems in place to truly engage the capacities of real healing. And it's not fast, and it's not pretty, and it's hard, but it is possible. So I do believe it's a combination both of, I think there is time societally, like we don't have time. That's not okay. Go away, right? Like, or whatever we need to do. But at the same time, if we want to get to a place where we truly bring down the level of violence, of abuse, of these things, there's going to have to be we're going to have to interrupt that pattern. And the healing of that is paramount. Actual attention on the healing has to happen.
Okay. That's pretty powerful. I mean, there's so many different extremes, right? I mean,
Yeah.
There's abuse, and then there's harassment, and I guess there's a similar conversation that's happening right now with systemic racism too. So there's systemic sexism, right? That I guess you're helping men to come to terms with, and then there's now the systemic racism, and anybody who has done wrong has been pushed out and revealed, right? So when they are unlearning, which hopefully some people are unlearning, do you think it's possible to unlearn, whether, right? And then, just to get deeper, should there, in certain cases, should they be forgiven? And if they come to terms with their core that has been blocked with such horrific cultural extremes?
Yeah, again, I think when we press on the extreme end of this spectrum, it becomes more cognitively difficult to imagine the ability to forgive. But your question, is it possible to rehabilitate? Is it possible to heal? Is it possible to actually do that? It absolutely is. And I mean, I am living proof of that. Many men around us. I would love to, I want to find a way to do this through media or through video or something, but I want to pull the curtain back and show the world what it looks like when a group of men come together to truly open up and go there all the way, because it's very visceral. There's actually a documentary that I would highly recommend to people. It's called The Work, and it's about a group of men who do this type of work in this, I think it's San Quentin prison in California. And it is, I'll just warn you, it's very intense. It's very, and it's intense on a human level.
Wait, let's put it in the chat. Jarvis, mind doing that for us? Yeah.
And another documentary with a colleague and friend of mine, Ashanti Branch, is called The Masks We Live In, which is about how this gender enculturation plays out in our schools and for young men. And I feel like those two films have a kind of a great, set some context to go deeper into this. But can we heal? Yeah. What's it look like? Scary, kind of wild, intense.
Okay. Thank you. Somebody sent me a question for Dwayne. And by the way, both you and Dwayne, if you want to put your information in the chat, that would be great too. But Dwayne, how can we get white people to give back to Black causes, like saving African American studies programs at city colleges, and like at City College, AFM studies program at City College in SF in San Francisco, for example. I'm taking that this person's from San Francisco.
So
Yeah.
I will say that people are giving to those programs. And if we want to amplify and increase that, it would be really making sure that those programs are really getting connected to the prospects. And you heard me comment earlier about how building a prospect list, that's really important for anybody who's trying to raise money. So for those programs, they have to identify the prospects and they really have to go and solicit them. One person who is making a lot of investments in that area, as you well know, it's been very public, is the Ford Foundation. The Rockefeller Foundation have made some really big.
Walker is amazing. Yeah.
Reed Hastings, you probably heard about recently, made a really large gift to historically Black colleges. It was a $140 million gift from he and his wife that they made to the United Negro College Fund and to all of the HBCUs. And so that really was investing in those institutions who really do house a lot of those programs.
Okay, thank you. And it's also important to contribute to Black-owned businesses as well, I would say at this point, right?
Yeah.
So
well, Black and Latino, minority communities have suffered tremendously, through COVID-19 because they don't have the infrastructure that a lot of the other small businesses do have, nor have they had access to capital.
Yeah, I just read a lot about how businesses owned by Black and brown people, they got fewer PPPs than white male owners, actually, which is actually kind of disgusting, I guess.
Yeah, it's an infrastructure issue. They don't, some of the paperwork that's required. Some of these folks are just operating and they're doing the work and they don't have all of the systems and they don't have an outside account. They're keeping their own books. So, they're not able to produce the kinds of financial reports that some of these institutions are requiring.
Okay, so I want to thank you both. You also extended 14 minutes. But next week, okay, let's get really excited. We only have 3 more culture classes of the summer semester. And the next week is really exciting. In fact, Dwayne, you introduced me to him. 4-time Tony Award winner, Ron Simons, who produced both The Color Purple on Broadway and Ain't Too Proud on Broadway. And then we're going to have David Nevins, who's the CEO and chairman of Showtime. And now that Viacom and CBS, which owns Showtime, merged, he's also the chief creative officer of CBS. So next week's going to be awesome. And then the week after, we're going to have a very innovative executive placement head, managing director, who's going to teach us his point of view of how we get our next job. And it's really interesting because it's not really just about updating your LinkedIn and networking. It's redefining your skill set, like not being like a marketer or an engineer or whatever. It's really about being the curiosity person, the teacher, the philosopher, because there really aren't any defined jobs anymore. It's more about what your skill set is. The money raiser, the empathy teacher, Dan Doty. So, that's going to be an interesting one. And Tiffany Jana, who wrote a book on unconscious bias. And then the last one, there's going to be a special performance by my friend who's called Princess Lockaroo, and she's going to give us a whacking. She's a whacker. And for any of you who have been watching Pose, that took place in the 80s. Whacking was the precursor to voguing. So we're going to see her, and that's going to be awesome. And then the rest of the hour, I'm sorry, it's just going to be me Zeitguiding. No interviews, because that's what I do. So thank you very much for everybody being here. I love you all. Thanks for building the community. I know how much harder it is to take the time out these days to do this kind of stuff, but I'm blessed that, we had almost 50 people on this one, which is pretty astounding in a world of Zoom fatigue and everybody's busier and depressed. So I hope I can inspire you all with that little giggle. And love you. Thanks, Dwayne. Thanks, Dan. Bye.
Bye, Brad.
Bye, Brad.